Hi there. Welcome to Algernon's Facebook Live for an update and recap of Algernon news on Proto. I'm Cindy Edwards from PR Media Now, joined by Algernon Pharmaceuticals CEO Chris Moreau. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Cindy.
It's a big day, big news day today.
Big news day for us and for the U.S. too, with the news of the president contracting coronavirus, but big news for us as well.
Yeah, before we touch on what's happening with President Trump and his wife, let's talk about Protel, what's happening. Well, for people who are just tuning in, who aren't familiar with this repurposed drug, tell us a little bit about the background on it.
So at a high level, and I always like to give the benefit of the doubt that there may be new folks joining us. Algernon Pharmaceuticals is a drug development company. Our special focus is to find new potential uses for older, relatively safe drugs. And our chief science officer, who has a tremendous understanding of biochemistry and how drugs function, their polypharma effect or multi-effect in the body, identified a number of compounds that he thought could potentially be efficacious in other diseases. We investigated 11 compounds in the last 2 years for the disease areas of non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, inflammatory bowel disease, chronic kidney disease, and idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. One of the leading drugs that we investigated in terms of its performance is an ex-Sanofi drug called Protel. Protel is an NMDA receptor antagonist. It binds with a receptor on cells in the body, and it has a neurological effect. It's currently being used to treat vertigo and dizziness in Japan and South Korea, but these NMDA receptors are also prevalent in the lung. So Dr. Williams postulated that this drug may reduce fibrosis in the lung, which is a form of, it's a disease. It causes scarring, fibrosis, the thickening of the tissue, and so on. And we were investigating Protel for this disease called IPF. We had very meaningful results when we put that drug up against the leading treatments for Protel. And it reduced fibrosis to a much greater extent. But in March of this year, we found out that Protel was also being investigated as a potential drug for H5N1. This is a very lethal form of flu, and it showed dramatic effects in an animal study. And based on that, we decided to also add to our clinical focus investigating Protel for COVID. And that's what we've been working on these last few months, in addition to also investigating Protel for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis.
Okay, well, it was just announced this week, I think, that you've got 113 patients currently that are in the clinical trial, and that's 75% of the patients you need to complete stage 2 of your multinational human study, correct?
Correct. Right. Our patient, the total study count is 150. We have 50 patients that will receive standard of care. They won't receive any drug. Then we have 50 patients who will receive a low dose of Protel plus standard of care. And then 50 patients who will receive a high dose of Protel and standard of care. And that study, as we've projected, we believe will be wrapped up in November based on the enrollment rate that we've been achieving. And we're hopeful to have a data readout before the end of Q4 of this year, 2020. So this morning we announced we're up to 113 patients, and that's almost exactly 75%.
Okay. Now, we mentioned off the top that President Trump and his wife have both been diagnosed with COVID-19. What does this mean for you? And is Protel something that could be used right now to help them?
Well, I mean, I think, along with everybody, we're concerned that the president has been infected. In terms of what it means for us, we're sort of, it may bring a greater awareness to COVID and the fact that we, as a company, we are working on a therapeutic treatment. something, a treatment, a drug that we hope will protect the lung from the pathogen. So it's not a vaccine. It's not targeting the pathogen. It's not interfering with its replication that we know of. What we have seen based on the data is that we believe the drug will reduce the inflammation in the lung and possibly the cytokine storm that occurs when the infection happens and the lungs get overwhelmed. In terms of the study is open in the U.S. I mean, we have 4 clinical sites to enroll in the study. A patient needs to be hospitalized. They need to be COVID confirmed with an approved test, and they need to be on oxygen. So that would mean really medium to moderate or moderate to severe disease. So the president could literally avail himself to one of our centers and enroll, but there's the U.S. Government has a tremendous amount of power, or the FDA. If the president or his aides, in looking at treatment options that are under trial, if they looked at Protel as a potential drug that the president might want to use or try, then we'd be pleased to work with the U.S. FDA and the U.S. government in that regard. I mean, that's something that the drug is in the U.S. It is in a drug depot. It is being dispensed to our clinical trial sites, and I'm sure arrangements could be made if it was decided that the drug should be could be used for the current situation.
I think a lot of people are putting so much stock into having a vaccine that they think once the vaccine comes and is approved, then we're good. COVID's taken care of. But that's not the way this works, is it?
Well, it could work that way. I mean, there are a number of issues. You know, vaccines are pathogen specific. So if you're trying to target a pathogen that mutates and has different strains, let's take influenza. If today you went down to get your flu shot, just because of the mechanics of deactivating the flu virus, mass producing the vaccine, getting it out for distribution, if you went for your flu shot today, you're really only protected somewhere in the 30 to 40% range, I understand, of the current flu that's in the community. And so the concern is with a pathogen like COVID-19, with the potential for the virus to mutate, that when you're dealing with a vaccine, it's very specific. And if changes are made to the code, the DNA or RNA, that in fact that vaccine may be rendered unable to provide protection. So there's also a timing issue. I mean, the CEO of Merck, Kenneth Frazier, about a month ago was interviewed and said that talk of a vaccine in weeks and even months is not doing anyone any help. Merck has been involved. In the last 25 years, there have only been 7 true new vaccines. Merck has done 4 of them. It takes time. And I think that in today's community where people are concerned about political pressure, queue lines being jumped in terms of process, it's difficult in some places to get people to simply put on masks. And I think the head of the CDC last week said that the mask is maybe even more effective than a vaccine. So if a vaccine is able to be produced, then fantastic. We're still carrying on with our therapeutic development. There will always be people that cannot take a vaccine for whatever reason. And to have a drug that can help reduce inflammation, that can help reduce the severity and duration of an infection like COVID, I think physicians need that kind of a tool in the toolbox.
For people who think, well, there's already Remdesivir, that's already in existence and it's already being used. How is Protel different from that?
Well, Remdesivir is a known antiviral drug, and it belongs to a class of drugs that mimic building blocks that the virus needs for replication. And I'm not sure right now, looking at the data, that they're even completely convinced the experts of the mechanism of action. Remdesivir in the last trial did reduce the number of hospital days for patients, but didn't seem to reduce mortality. And so to show you how complex the data analysis is, that suggests that people who were going home, it sent people home early that were already going home, that it didn't really affect the more serious endpoint of a study like that, which would be mortality or progression along the WHO ordinal score, the score of assigning a number to how serious you are hospitalized, you're on oxygen, you're on mechanical ventilation, then you're on intubation, and then you go through the final stages. So my view is a cocktail. A cocktail of drugs and treatments need to be available. There may be a combinatory effect, an accretive effect. We don't know that yet right now. What we will, not intentionally in that I'm often asked, why aren't you doing a trial with other drugs? Well, the first thing you need to do is find out if your drug works on its own. And so that's why the trial was designed, the current trial we're running, the phase 2b/3. But because we're running it in 4 different countries, there are different standards of care in each country and sometimes by state. So what we should see when we analyze the data is the combinatory effect of Proto plus whatever that standard of care is in that country or city or state where we're running the trial. So that will add to the depth of the data and so on. But we need lots of tools in the medical chest. That's my view and the view of our company.
We have a question from Adam who's tuning in. He says, any efforts underway to evaluate this compound in the flu as well?
We'd like to investigate it for the flu. Algernon is a very small publicly traded company with right now limited capital resources, and we'd like to investigate Protel for the flu. I think we're going to wait to see what the results are from our current phase 2b/3 trial. I think our hope is that perhaps it could be a bit of a generic host protective compound that physicians could apply that will reduce the inflammation. And just to note on this point, while we think we have a very reasonable academic and data-driven, although animal, to suggest that Protel may work for COVID-19. That was the H5N1 study from China, where the drug reduced mortality by 40%. But recently, UT Dallas and a group of researchers, I think there were 13, investigating retroactive data from COVID patients from China compared to healthy patients, looking at gene expression. They saw all the typical genes they would have expected from inflammation in the lungs, but they saw one gene overexpressed by 200 or 300-fold, and that gene is responsible for the NMDA receptor. That's the receptor that Protel binds with, and they postulated that Protel would be a potential treatment for COVID. So, we're hoping there may be a generic application for other infections of the lung. COVID shares a similar pathology to H5N1, but the proof will be in the pudding. We'll see when the data comes out, and hopefully we see a signal. It shows efficacy, and then we can start to expand investigating it for other conditions of the lung. We do know that it reduces fibrosis in our animal studies for IPF. And interesting, what we're reading too is that patients that survive COVID seem to be moving towards fibrosis in the lungs much more quickly. And that scarring and fibrosis, maybe there's sort of a 2-pronged effect that we can see from Protel. Maybe it'll reduce the severity and duration. That might lead to a reduction of the damage in the lung that might occur even if you survive.
I think that's a huge, huge factor in all of this, because a lot of people survive COVID. The majority of people survive COVID. It's what could be long-term damaging effects of COVID that we want to avoid. So if Protel can do that, that's a huge, huge win. Mary Cook says, have you reached out to Donald Trump, and do you think he's aware of Protel?
I'm not sure if the president is aware, and I don't really want to comment at the moment on what we're doing sort of behind the scenes to on that situation. I just want to say that we completely, and I want to stress this, this is maybe something different about Protel compared to some other drugs that are going through phase 1 or 2 trials. When you have a repurposed drug, you have a known safety history. This drug has been prescribed for up to 40 years in Japan and South Korea without any serious effects. It's been investigated in off-label clinical trials, thousands of patients, where there's a hypersensitivity to adverse effects. 2 weeks ago, a very important news release, an independent medical monitoring board watching our study unanimously signed off that the drug is safe and that we should carry on with the study. So I'm sure that the White House and the president's medical team have, you can imagine, their options that they can apply. We believe that Protel will do no harm. That's a very important thing in these trials, but has the potential to have a significant impact. And as I said before, we'd be willing to assist as we would in any other situation where there was a serious need and we thought that we'd be able to respond.
Okay, we're just going to take a few more minutes here. Jason said, not sure if it's been discussed. Anything ever come of the South Korea phase 2? I think you touched on that.
The South Korea trial, so just to remind the audience, the South Korea trial is a different trial. We supported a physician-initiated trial in South Korea because South Korea is a country where Protel is approved. So it was also approved in Japan. In the early days, Dr. Williams and I had no idea if the US FDA would let us run a trial for Protel in the US. And so we did work to support a trial. The trial is a bit different. You really have to be very sick to get into the trial. The 2 clinical sites where the trial is currently running have a lack of patients. And so this is not a reflection on Algernon. It's not a reflection on Protel. It's actually a reflection on the management of the disease in Korea, South Korea. So I don't have an update as of today. There have been some enrollment. There has been enrollment in that study. I don't have a number for the market today. We're reviewing that trial. It's very likely based on the success of the phase 2b/3, which is the key trial, that we'll have that data long before the phase 2 study in South Korea would finish based on the current enrollment rate. Oh. So that sort of gives an update on South Korea.
And speaking of phase 3, Craig asks, at what point would this study move to phase 3? And once you complete phase 3, are you done with all your phases?
Right. So it's a great question. So let me just walk the audience through this. We have a phase 2b/3 trial going. We expect data by the end of the year. There's 3 potential outcomes of our study. One is that the drug did not show any efficacy or the signal wasn't really strong enough. And we tried and we move on to our IPF and chronic cough study and data in Q1 of next year. The second outcome is that the data was compelling and we want to advance it into a phase 3 trial. The size of the phase 3 trial is dependent on the data from the phase 2b. Some folks have logged into the FDA, US FDA Gov clinical trials, and it shows we've estimated another 500 or 600 patients for the phase 3 trial. That trial would start about 3 months after the phase 2b completes, and we would hope to have that trial completed by July or August of next year. So it's a bit complex, but the third potential is that our data is so powerful from our phase 2b that we apply for and receive emergency use authorization from the US FDA. That would allow us to start to offer Protel on an immediate basis in the US, and likely globally other markets would respond. And that would be a fantastic outcome if the drug was working, and we would start to, now we would still have to work on our phase 3 behind the scenes, but in essence, we would start to get the drug out into the market and people could start to avail themselves of it. Keep in mind, out of 100% of people infected with COVID, about 10% apply for assistance for emergency intensive care, and so on. And so we're really talking about people who are hospitalized and who are progressing that perhaps based on the data would find a reduction in the severity and duration of their infection from Protel.
We certainly have a captive audience here, and we have a lot of questions coming in. A lot of people saying, great job, team. One question in particular from Daniel here is Merck would obviously be interested in Protel. Has there been any discussion with them about it?
You know, I don't want to specifically talk about what our activities are yet. And just to remind folks, these sessions, and thanks for joining us today, I'm trying to add some color to the material news. We announce material news through news releases so that the whole market has a chance to digest it. And but in terms of our strategy, we believe that there will be a tremendous amount of additional interest. There is interest currently. I can say that. I think there'll be additional interest based on our data, and it's going to come very, very quickly. And I think any company that either a global pharma or a pharma that's working in respiratory diseases will have an interest, but it's about the data. I think that we have a very different model. I can tell you, folks, that repurposing a drug is not easy. We have a different, unique approach. We're repurposing a drug that's never been approved in the US or Europe, so we have no generic interference. We're investigating drugs that have had limited market approval. This has been done a few times very successfully. We're talking billion-dollar companies. Tecfidera, the drug, thalidomide, they repurposed. They had no generic competition. We're doing the same thing. But it's not the most comfortable for pharma, for investment banks. They really have to get their head around it. Folks like some inside stories. I can tell you that Dr. Williams and I have been in many meetings with very experienced pharma executives who have scratched their heads when we walk them through our business model until finally, and it's not that intuitive, they go, and sorry, just to be specific, one large meeting we had at the end of when Mark presented, one of the senior guys said, brilliant. And I'm saying that more for Mark Williams, I wasn't speaking at the time. But it was a hell of a compliment. And we faced lots of opposition in the early days or lack of interest. Oh, repurposed drug. Oh, I understand. Yeah, okay. What's next? But now things are a bit different. And if we can hit the ball out of the park with Protel, we have a number of other drugs that we have shown have great potential in our animal studies for some other diseases. And I think it'll be exciting for us to get past that hurdle. It'll be great that COVID, that we could possibly help COVID patients. That wasn't the original focus. It's been added to what we've been doing. We had to respond based on the data we saw. We had to go down this path, and things are going quite well. And we're very hopeful we'll have some positive news for the world.
Okay, Chris, to keep this from going too long, I'm going to ask you a few rapid fire questions from some of our friends that are watching. From Ted, he says, since Protel is repurposed drug, can you comment on whether Algernon has any level of exclusivity on sales in North America and globally?
Well, we do. We have filed new intellectual property rights called method of use patents. So we've associated Protel now with the treatment of respiratory diseases. That's a patent that is difficult to get because even if somebody had the idea 5 years ago and published a paper, you're out of luck. So we filed new method of use patents. We are reformulating the drug in our own formulation. And so based on that, we have very solid intellectual property rights. These are the same rights that thalidomide used, Celgene, billion-dollar company, Biogen's Tecfidera. I encourage folks to look those two drugs up. Same process, method of use patents. They're difficult, but they're definitely viable. We believe we're very confident that we have a very stable intellectual property suite for Protel.
Oliver asks, once FDA approval has hopefully been granted, what sort of time frame does it usually take for Health Canada?
You know, the US FDA is really is seen as the granddaddy. We've had very solid cooperation from Health Canada. They approved, in fact, our phase 2B trial. We couldn't get any clinical sites to step in on a timely basis. So we're obviously moving forward. But I think once the US FDA approves, and let's take out emergency use, just in the normal course of a drug. There are many countries that just simply rely on what the US FDA has to say. Other countries have to go through their own process, but you can apply using the data from your US FDA study. So I think my view is that if our data is strong enough with our phase 2B trial, we will apply for emergency use approval. If we get it, we're selling the drug. We're going to make that drug available to any country as quickly as possible. If we have positive data, but we don't get approval, we have to wait till our phase 3 data next year. Again, we would apply after the phase 3 data for immediate emergency use. I don't see us having to go through then the typical approvals after that phase 3, because this is an acute condition. It's a pandemic. So sorry, I think I've gotten off the topic, but I think Health Canada, they've been very supportive working with us. I think it would be hand in glove in terms of anything we get from the US FDA.
And do you have to get approval from the European EMA?
It would be the same. You have to get approval, but I think they'd be tremendous if the US FDA's approved it. Emergency use, I think the European group, the union, would come together pretty quickly and would start. And especially if you're talking about a drug that is helping but is very safe. You know, we're not looking at a concern where there's serious side effects, and now the FDA is balancing it. Well, it did reduce mortality, but it also caused serious problems. I don't think we're going to see that with Protel. So I think if we have a strong signal, I think things would move quite quickly.
So I think that answers Ted's question. How quickly will you be able to scale up production?
So a bigger problem. We weren't prepared for global use for Protel. And we did some math, and I was interviewed 2 weeks ago by a group, and I shared some of the data. We did some projections based on the current infection rate in the US, Europe, and rest of world. You're talking about 10% of people who are of the 100% of infected at any time, 10% needing help, hospitalized, and then 80% use. Of our higher dose for 2 weeks, we're talking about 40 million pills per month. It's a massive amount. We are working on what would be required to scale up our new formulation of Protel. We're also working on an injectable, which will take a little more time. And although it's more, you have to think about folks who are in ICU. They may be intubated. They may be on a gastric tube. We're having to crush the pills. They may not be able to digest. So an intravenous solution is best. But timing-wise, it's very time-consuming and complex. We are working on it. We are also working on acquiring additional supply of Protel sooner than later, so that should we receive emergency use approval, we would be able to, on an immediate basis, have a supply. Keep in mind, we're still going on the fact that this will be our data. It's our US FDA study. We will have a priority position with our intellectual property. So no one will be able to bring in Protel from Japan other than Algernon. And so we are working to do our best to see if we could provide an immediate supply. The quantum is massive, but we're working on it.
Okay, I'm going to make this the last question coming in from Shiming Li. Could you comment on the company's finances? We report quarterly with our interim financial statements, quarterly statements. I think as of July, we showed 5 or 6 million cash on hand. We have projected that we have the funds to complete the phase 2B part of this study. We will need additional capital to conduct the phase 3 trial, which could be another 600 to 700 patients. However, if we have positive phase 2B data, I do think we're going to see a dramatic change in our value. I think today we have a 40 some odd million Canadian market cap. Hard for me to imagine, although sometimes the capital markets are inefficient, that we wouldn't have a significant change in our value and also in liquidity if we had positive phase 2B news. And I think we'd be able to access capital very quickly in a very non-dilutive setting
to get the capital we would need to either commercialize Protel for COVID or take us on to a phase 3. I think that to me is very clear.
Okay, I said that was the last question. I really mean it this time. One more from Ted. He says, does Algernon manufacture Protel in China? Hopefully you are multi-sourced. And this is the last question.
So there are some things I can't disclose. We did retain our first go at manufacturing for CGMP material was Cascade Chemistry in the United States. We are considering various countries and supplies. They're US FDA CGMP approved for massive, I mean, again, 30 to 40 million finished product pills per month tablets. You're talking about a massive quantum. We likely may have to rely on more than one manufacturer. We're looking at trying to reduce the startup time. You also have stability testing of your API. API means active pharmaceutical ingredient. It's got to have stability, shelf life. So does your finished product. Very complex. We're working on it with global experts, and we think we're going to have some positive answers soon in that regard.
Okay, Chris Moreau. Wow, lots of good information coming out today from Algernon Pharmaceuticals. Thank you very much for joining us today and enlightening us and getting us up to speed on what's going on with the trials. And everything seems to be on track, which is really great news. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Nice meeting you. And thanks to everyone for your ongoing support.
Yes, thanks to everybody who tuned in. And of course, for more information, go to algernonpharmaceuticals.com. And that concludes our broadcast. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.